Julian's voice came through the intercom, a low crackle that cut through the sterile hum of the office. Leo. My office. 5 minutes before the call, a click, then silence. The command was simple, routine even, but it sent a familiar jolt through my system, a nervous current that was equal parts dread and a deeply embarrassing, private thrill. I watched him through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of his office, the physical manifestation of our professional hierarchy. He was already turning away from his desk, his back a formidable landscape in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of mild frustration that I had cataloged and cross-referenced 1,000 times. I pushed back from my own desk, the wheels of my chair sighing against the polished concrete floor. The button on my collar suddenly felt too tight, a tiny garrote restricting my breath. I undid it. A small, useless rebellion. My reflection in the darkened screen of my monitor was a pale, anxious ghost. For 2 years, my life had been circumscribed by the view through that glass wall. I knew the precise angle of the late afternoon sun as it hit the corner of his mahogany desk. I knew the way he'd lean back in his chair, linking his hands behind his head when a deal was going well, and the way he'd pinch the bridge of his nose when it was not. I knew the rhythm of his breathing, or at least, I imagined I did. He was the sun my sad little planet of a life orbited, and he was completely, blissfully unaware. Closing the heavy glass door to his office behind me felt like sealing myself in a vacuum. The ambient noise of the marketing floor vanished, replaced by the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. The air in here was different. It smelled of him, a subtle, clean scent of expensive cologne, worn leather, and something else, something uniquely Julian. It was the scent of quiet confidence and unassailable authority. He was standing by the window, looking down at the river of traffic 20 floors below. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, painting streaks of neon and gold against the deepening twilight. "Close the blinds," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the confined space. He didn't turn around. I moved to obey, my fingers fumbling with the cord. The metal slats clattered down, shutting out the world and encasing us in the soft, intimate glow of his desk lamp. Just us. My heart picked up its pace, a frantic, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This was unusual. He never closed the blinds. His office was a fishbowl, a deliberate choice to project transparency and control. He finally turned to face me, and his expression was unreadable. Julian's face was a masterclass in neutrality, but I had spent years studying the subtle tells. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible set of his jaw. Something was wrong. Or, not wrong, but different. "The call with Sterling Thorne," he began, moving to sit on the edge of his desk, a casual posture that was anything but. It put him directly in my path, forcing a proximity that made my skin prickle with awareness. "It's in 3 minutes. But this isn't about the quarterly projections. It's about the Cheyenne River deal." I nodded, trying to look like the competent, unflappable project manager he paid me to be. "I have the revised proposal ready. The environmental impact assessment came back clean. Their board should be pleased." "They will be," he said, his gaze fixed on mine. It was an unervingly direct look, the kind that made you feel he was seeing straight through your professional facade to the nervous, uncertain person hiding underneath. But that's not the problem. Robert Thorne is the problem. Robert Thorne, the 60-something, staunchly conservative CEO of Sterling Thorne. A man who built his empire on family values and made a point of only doing business with people who reflected his worldview. His traditionalist stance. I ventured. "His aggressively traditionalist stance," Julian corrected. "I got a call from his COO this morning. An unofficial heads-up. Thorne is flying in for the final negotiations next week. He wants to host us at his private lodge in Wyoming for the weekend. To get to know the men behind the numbers," Julian let out a short, humorless breath. He also made a comment about the importance of stability, about how he prefers to work with settled family men. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew where this was going. Julian was notoriously private, perpetually single. His personal life was a black box, a subject of endless and fruitless speculation around the office. He was married to his work, they said. It was a convenient narrative, but I always suspected it was more complicated. "He thinks I'm a flight risk," Julian continued, his voice dropping lower. A lone wolf. Unpredictable. He wants to see a partner. A home. A life outside this office. He gestured vaguely at the room around us. I stood there, mute, my mind racing. I didn't understand my role in this. Was he going to ask me to fabricate a life for him? Create a fake social media profile for a non-existent girlfriend? My mind churned with possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. Then he looked at me, a long, searching look that lasted an eternity. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken things. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray, seemed to be asking a question I couldn't decipher. The Cheyenne River deal is worth $90 million, Leo, he said, his voice soft but laced with steel. It's the biggest project this firm has ever landed. It will secure our future for the next decade. I am not going to lose it because Robert Thorne has a 1950s view of the world. He pushed off the desk and took a step closer. He was so close now I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. That scent of his was stronger, more potent. It was clouding my thoughts, making it hard to breathe. He wants to see stability, Julian said, his eyes never leaving mine. He wants to see a partnership, a committed, long-term relationship. Another beat of silence. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. So, he said, the word hanging in the air between us. For one weekend, that's what we'll give him. It took a moment for the meaning to land. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to process the impossible implication of his words. Me and him. A partnership. A committed, long-term. I couldn't even finish the thought. I don't understand, I whispered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first crack in his stoic facade. It was a wry, almost pained expression. It's simple, Leo. You and I are going to Wyoming. And for 72 hours, you are not my project manager. You're my partner. The word hung there. Partner. It echoed in the silent, darkened room. He said it so calmly, as if he were suggesting we move a meeting or change a font on a PowerPoint slide. But he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my carefully controlled, painfully lonely world. He was asking me to pretend to have the one thing I wanted more than anything else on earth. With him. Why me? The question escaped before I could stop it. It was a raw, vulnerable sound. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because Thorne's people have been doing their homework. They know I've had the same project manager for 2 years. They know we work late together. They know we travel together. The foundation is already there. It's plausible, he paused. And because I trust you. I trust you. The words were a bomb and a knife, all at once. He trusted my professionalism, my discretion. He trusted me to act, to play a role. It had nothing to do with the frantic, hopeless affection I harbored for him. It was a business decision, a $90 million business decision. I should have said no. I should have pointed out the insanity of the plan, the 100 ways it could go wrong. I should have protected the fragile piece of my own heart. But I was looking at Julian, at the earnest, almost desperate light in his gray eyes, and I knew I was incapable of refusing him anything. Okay, I heard myself say, the voice sounding distant, disconnected from my own body. Okay, I'll do it. Relief washed over his features, so profound and immediate, it was like watching a storm cloud pass. Good, he breathed. He glanced at the clock on his desk. The call. We'll talk about the details tomorrow. We'll need a backstory. A history. He straightened his tie, the smooth, practiced motion of a man reassembling his armor. The moment of vulnerability was over. He was the boss again. But as I turned to leave, my hand on the cool metal of the door handle, he spoke again, his voice quiet. Leo. I stopped, my back still to him. Thank you. I didn't turn around. I couldn't let him see my face. I just nodded and walked out, closing the door on the man who had just asked me to build a fantasy with him, brick by painful, beautiful brick. I walked back to my desk, my legs unsteady, and sat down in the dark. Through the glass, I saw him pick up his phone for the call, his face once again an impassive mask. But for a split second, before he turned away, I thought I saw him look towards my desk. A long, lingering look that I would spend the entire night dissecting, analyzing, and desperately trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined. The days leading up to the Wyoming trip were a blur of meticulous, agonizing preparation. We spent hours in his office after everyone else had gone home, the city a glittering tapestry below us, constructing the architecture of our fictional life together. It was the most intimate and excruciating work I had ever done. We had to build a history, a shared narrative that was both believable and easily remembered under pressure. We met in college. Julian decided on the first night, pacing in front of the now permanently closed blinds. At a charity fundraiser. It's boring, respectable, and impossible to fact-check. What was I studying? I asked, my pen poised over a fresh page in my notebook. The page was titled U.S. The absurdity of it made my hand tremble. Architecture, he said without hesitation. You wanted to build things. But you were drawn to the human element, the way people interact with spaces, so you pivoted to marketing. It shows passion, a change of heart. It's a good story. He knew I'd doodle buildings in the margins of my notes during meetings. He had noticed that. The thought was a small, warm stone dropped into the churning pool of my anxiety. He was observant. He paid attention to details. This was good for the mission. It was terrifying for my heart. We decided on a timeline. We'd been together for 4 years. We lived together in his downtown apartment, a place I had only ever seen in pictures from an architectural magazine. He pulled up the floor plan on his monitor, and we spent an hour deciding where my imaginary belongings would go. Your desk would go here, he said, pointing to a corner in the second bedroom that served as his home gym. It gets the morning light, he said it so casually, but the image it conjured, me, in his home, bathed in morning light, was so vivid it made my throat ache. I'm the cook, I found myself saying, the lie slipping out with surprising ease. You can't even operate a microwave. Your diet consists of takeout and protein bars. He stopped pacing and looked at me, a genuine, crooked smile gracing his lips. It transformed his entire face, erasing the stern lines of the CEO and revealing a glimpse of someone younger, more carefree. True, he admitted. So you're the cook. What's my favorite thing you make? Lasagna, I said instantly. It's comforting, unpretentious. You pretend to like fancy, deconstructed meals at Michelin-star restaurants. But secretly, you just want something warm and solid. The smile faded, replaced by that intense, unreadable scrutiny. He stared at me for a long moment. How do you know that? My face flushed. I don't. I'm guessing. It's part of the character. I was a terrible liar. I knew it because I'd once overheard him on the phone, turning down a reservation at a chic new restaurant to order in from a simple Italian place. It was a tiny, insignificant detail, one of 1,000 I had stored away. He didn't press the issue. He just nodded slowly and turned back to the window. Lasagna, he repeated softly, to himself. Okay, the most difficult part was the physical aspect. We had to be comfortable touching each other. Julian, ever the pragmatist, approached it like a training exercise. Thorne will be watching, he said, his tone all business. We can't hesitate. It has to look natural. Instinctive. He stood in front of me, his hands in his pockets. Put your hand on my arm, he instructed. I reached out, my fingers clumsy, and placed my hand on the crisp fabric of his shirt sleeve. His bicep was solid, unyielding beneath the cotton. My skin tingled where it made contact. I felt like I was handling a live explosive. Fine, he said, his voice a low rumble. Now my back. Small of my back. It's a common gesture. Possessive, but not overly aggressive. I slid my hand from his arm, letting it hover in the air for a second before resting it on the small of his back. He was so warm. The heat seeped through his shirt, through my palm, and shot straight up my arm. He stiffened for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible tightening of the muscles beneath my hand. I saw it. I felt it. I am not the only one who is nervous. The thought was a revelation. Julian, the unshakable, was just as unsettled by this as I was. But his discomfort wasn't one of repulsion. It was something else. An awareness. A tension that mirrored my own. Good, he said, his voice a little rough. He cleared his throat. We'll need to hold hands. At dinner, maybe while walking the grounds. He held out his own hand. It was a silent command. I looked at his long, capable fingers, the neatly trimmed nails, the faint scar across his knuckles. I had imagined holding this hand more times than I could count. To do it now, under this clinical, false pretense, felt like a special kind of torture. I slowly lifted my hand and laced my fingers with his. His grip was firm, his skin dry and warm. It was a perfect fit. My hand, which had always felt slightly too large and awkward, felt right for the first time in my life. We stood there for a moment, hands joined, in the silent, artificially lit office. The $90 million, Robert Thorne, the entire charade, it all melted away. There was only the feeling of his hand in mine, a solid, grounding presence. He was the one who pulled away first. He dropped my hand as if it were hot and shoved both of his back into his pockets. "We should get some sleep," he said, his gaze fixed on a point over my shoulder. "We fly out Friday morning." I spent the next 48 hours in a state of suspended animation. I packed a suitcase, my hands moving on autopilot, choosing clothes that a fictional version of myself might wear. The sensible sweaters and dark jeans of Leo, the supportive architect turned marketer partner. I imagined Julian doing the same, and a wave of surreal humor washed over me. Two grown men, playing dress-up for a fortune. The morning of the flight was gray and drizzling, a perfect reflection of my mood. I met Julian at the private airfield. He was already there, standing beside a sleek jet, talking to the pilot. He was dressed in dark jeans, a soft gray cashmere sweater, and a leather jacket. He looked less like a CEO and more like someone on vacation. He looked relaxed, handsome, and utterly unattainable. He saw me and his face broke into a welcoming smile. A public smile. The show had begun. "There you are," he said, loud enough for the ground crew to hear. He walked over and, without any warning, wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a one-armed hug. Traffic was bad. My body went rigid. His arm was a band of iron and heat around me. He smelled of coffee and that familiar, intoxicating cologne. I could only manage a choked nod. He squeezed my shoulder, then guided me towards the steps of the jet, his hand now resting proprietorially on the small of my back. The gesture was exactly as we'd practiced, but out here, in the cold morning air, it felt entirely different. It felt real. Every nerve in my body was screaming, a chorus of alarm and exhilaration. The interior of the jet was all cream leather and polished wood. It was an island of quiet luxury, a world away from my cramped apartment. We settled into seats opposite each other. As the plane taxied and took off, a comfortable silence fell between us. Julian closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the seat. I watched the city shrink below us, the familiar grid of my life dissolving into a map. I felt like I was leaving myself behind, heading towards an unknown territory where all the rules were different. I must have been staring, because when I finally tore my eyes away from the window, I found him watching me. His expression was soft, his eyes unguarded in the dim cabin light. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "A little," I admitted. "I'm not a great actor." "You don't have to be," he said. "Just be yourself. The version of yourself from our story." He paused, his gaze dropping to my hands, which were clenched in my lap. "Leo, just look at me the way you sometimes do in meetings." My blood ran cold. He had seen the way I looked at him, the unguarded admiration, the hopeless yearning. He knew. My carefully guarded secret wasn't a secret at all. I felt exposed, stripped bare at 30,000 feet. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow the plane whole. He must have seen the panic on my face, because he quickly added, "When you're impressed with a pitch, when you think I've made a good point, that look of respect, that's all we need." It was a clumsy recovery, a transparent attempt to soften the blow of his observation. But it didn't work. The truth was out, hanging in the pressurized air between us. He knew I didn't just look at him with professional respect, and he was going to use it. He was going to leverage my genuine, unrequited feelings to sell a $90 million lie. The thought was both deeply cynical and, in a twisted way, thrilling. He wasn't just using my skills as a project manager. He was using a part of my soul. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and looked back out the window, my reflection a ghostly, haunted figure against the endless blue sky. The game had changed. This wasn't just about acting anymore. It was about surviving. The lodge in Wyoming was something out of a magazine. A sprawling, magnificent structure of stone and timber nestled in a valley of whispering aspens. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was a world away from the concrete and glass of the city. Robert Thorne met us at the door. He was a barrel-chested man with a booming voice and a handshake that could crush walnuts. "Julian, good to finally meet you in person," he roared, clapping Julian on the back. His eyes, small and sharp, immediately flicked to me. Julian, smooth as ever, didn't miss a beat. He draped his arm around my shoulder, a gesture that now felt both practiced and shockingly intimate. Robert, a pleasure. This is my partner, Leo. Partner, Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly as he took my hand. His grip was punishing. Good to meet you, son. A man's nothing without a steady hand at home. I murmured something polite, my voice sounding thin in the vast, cathedral-like entryway. I was acutely aware of Julian's arm around me, the weight of it, the warmth of it. It was my anchor in this sea of testosterone and old money. The weekend unfolded in a series of carefully orchestrated performances. We hiked through golden aspen groves, Julian's hand finding mine as we navigated a rocky path. We had dinner in a grand dining room, a fire roaring in the stone hearth, and I found myself recounting the story of our first meeting at the charity gala, the details Julian and I had invented flowing from my lips with an ease that frightened me. I spoke of my supposed architectural studies, and Julian would interject with a fond, knowing smile, adding a detail here, a shared memory there. We were a well-oiled machine, a testament to our late-night rehearsals. But beneath the performance, something else was happening. The lines were blurring. When Julian's knee brushed against mine under the dinner table, it no longer felt like a strategic move. It felt like a simple, unconscious point of contact between two people who were comfortable with each other. When he laughed at a joke I made, the sound was deep and genuine, not the polite chuckle he used with clients. He was watching me constantly, not in the way a director watches an actor, but in a more personal, searching way. I would catch him looking at me from across the room, his expression thoughtful, almost puzzled, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. The second night, Thorne insisted on a nightcap of expensive scotch in his study. The room was filled with taxidermy and leather-bound books, a shrine to masculine pursuits. We sat in deep armchairs, the fire crackling, and Thorne began to pontificate about legacy and tradition. It's about building something that lasts, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. A business, a family. It's all the same. You need a rock, Julian. Someone who knows you, truly knows you. His eyes shifted to me again. What's the one thing about this man that nobody else knows? The question hung in the air, a direct and unexpected challenge. My mind went blank. All I knew were the professional facts, the carefully constructed fictions. The silence stretched. I could feel Julian's tension beside me, a low hum of anxiety. And then, something surfaced. A memory from one of our late-night sessions. He'd been tired, his guard down, and had mentioned offhandedly that his father had been a carpenter. He'd said it with a strange mix of pride and something that sounded like regret. I took a slow sip of my scotch, the burn steadying my nerves. I looked at Julian, a soft, conspiratorial smile on my face. The kind of smile one lover gives another when sharing a private secret. He keeps a small, hand-carved wooden bird in his desk drawer, I said, my voice quiet but clear. His father made it for him when he was a boy. He touches it for good luck before every major call. It was a complete fabrication, a wild guess spun from a single thread of truth. I had no idea if it was real. I was gambling everything on a hunch, on my observation of the man beside me. I watched Julian's face. For a split second, his mask of cool composure slipped. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, vulnerability, and something else I couldn't name. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of deep, profound affection directed at me. He reached over and placed his hand on my knee, a firm, reassuring pressure. It was a gesture for Thorne, but the look in his eyes was just for me. He knows all my secrets, Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly real. Thorne grunted, satisfied. He drained his glass and stood up. A good woman, or man, is a treasure. Don't you ever forget that. He clapped Julian on the shoulder again and bid us good night. We walked back to our shared suite in silence. The suite was opulent, with a shared living area and two separate, but adjoining, bedrooms. The air between us was electric, charged with the aftermath of my lie. I had stepped over a line. I had invented an intimacy that felt more real than anything we had rehearsed. I stopped at the door to my room, my hand on the knob. I'm sorry, I said, not looking at him. I overstepped. The bird thing. I just made it up. Leo, His voice was low. I forced myself to turn and face him. He was standing only a few feet away, his hands in the pockets of his slacks. The soft light from the hallway lamp cast shadows across his face, making his expression impossible to read. "It wasn't a bird," he said quietly. "It's a dog. A poorly carved, clumsy-looking retriever. And I keep it in my coat pocket, not my desk." My breath caught in my throat. It was real. The core of it was real. My wild guess had hit the heart of a truth I had no right to know. He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "How did you know?" "I didn't," I whispered. "You mentioned your father was a carpenter. I imagined it." We stood there, suspended in the charged silence. The pretense of the weekend, the $90 million deal, the watching eyes of Robert Thorne, it all evaporated. There was only this room, this moment, and the terrifying, unspoken truth hanging between us. He had secrets, and somehow, I had stumbled right into one of them. He took another step, closing the distance between us. My back was against the door. There was nowhere for me to go. He raised a hand, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to touch my face. Instead, his fingers brushed against the wood of the door, right beside my head. His arm formed a cage around me. "You see things, Leo," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my chest. "You see things that other people don't." My heart is hammering. My breath is trapped in my lungs. He's so close. I can see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw. His scent is all around me, a heady, overwhelming presence. This is no longer an act. This is something else, something dangerous and real. "Is that a bad thing?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes hold mine. A long, silent conversation passes between us. I see a conflict in his gaze, a battle between the controlled CEO and the man he keeps hidden. "No," he says, his voice rough with an emotion I can't identify. "It's not a bad thing." He leans in closer, and my eyes flutter shut. I brace myself for a kiss, for the culmination of 2 years of silent longing. My entire body is a tightly wound spring of anticipation. But the kiss doesn't come. I feel his breath ghost across my cheek, warm and soft. And then he pulls back. When I open my eyes, he has retreated a few steps, his hands shoved back in his pockets. The moment is broken. The spell is shattered. "We should get some sleep," he says, his voice strained. "Thorne wants to go fishing at dawn." He turns and walks into his own room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone in the hallway, my heart still racing, my body trembling with the ghost of a touch that never happened. I lean my head against the cool wood of the door, utterly confused and aching with a new, more potent kind of hope. He had felt it too. I was sure of it. This elaborate charade was starting to feel less like a lie and more like a confession. The next day was our last. The fishing trip at dawn was a chilly, awkward affair. Thorne seemed pleased, Julian was professionally distant, and I was a wreck. I kept replaying the moment in the hallway, searching for meaning, for a clue to what was happening inside Julian's head. He was impenetrable, his CEO mask firmly back in place. He treated me with a polite, partnerly affection that was perfect for our audience and utterly torturous for me. A hand on my shoulder, a shared smile. Each gesture felt like a phantom limb, a reminder of the raw intimacy that had almost surfaced the night before. The deal was finalized over lunch. Handshakes were exchanged, contracts were signed. $90 million secured. As we boarded the jet to go home, Julian was all business, on the phone with our legal team, his voice crisp and authoritative. The transformation was complete. The Julian from the lodge, the one who had looked at me with something vulnerable in his eyes, was gone. We flew home in near silence. The unspoken tension from the hallway was a third passenger in the cabin, sitting between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to ask him what it all meant, but the wall was back up, higher and thicker than ever. He was my boss again, and I was his employee. The game was over. We had won, and I had never felt more like a loser. The first day back at the office was brutal. The glass wall of his office seemed to mock me. He was in back-to-back meetings, the conquering hero, while I sat at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, my mind a million miles away in a Wyoming lodge. He didn't call me into his office. He didn't speak to me except for a curt, "Good morning," as he breezed past my desk. It was as if the weekend had never happened. The intimacy we had faked and the realness I had felt was nothing more than a fever dream. My hope, which had flared so brightly, began to wither. It was all an act. A brilliant, calculated performance by a master manipulator. He had seen my crush, my pathetic, schoolboy yearning, and he had used it. He had played me perfectly. The realization was a cold, bitter pill. I felt foolish, used, and heartbroken. By the end of the day, I had resolved to put it behind me. I would be the consummate professional. I would rebuild my own walls, and I would never, ever let him see a crack in them again. I would start looking for a new job. It was the only way to salvage what was left of my dignity. I was packing up my briefcase, the last one in the office as usual, when the intercom crackled to life. My heart leaped into my throat before I could stop it. Leo, my office. The same words he'd spoken a week ago. The words that had started this whole insane mess. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into a neutral mask. I would not let him see how this affected me. I walked to his office, my steps measured and confident. I was in control. I opened the door without knocking. He was standing by the window, just as he had been that first night. But this time, the blinds were open. The city glittered below, a diamond carpet of light. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, my voice cool, professional. He turned around slowly. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the confident set of his shoulders seemed to have slumped. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened. "Close the door," he said, his voice quiet. I hesitated, then did as he asked. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the silent room. I remained by the door, keeping my distance. "The bonus for the Sterling Thorn deal will be in your next paycheck," he began, his tone formal. "It's substantial. You earned it." "Thank you," I said stiffly. "That's very generous." "It's not generous, it's what you're owed," he corrected. He ran a hand through his hair, the familiar gesture of frustration. "You were exceptional, Leo. Your performance was flawless." Performance. The word was a slap in the face. "I was just doing my job," I said, the words tasting like ash. An uncomfortable silence fell. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his desk, at a stack of papers, at anything but me. "Look, if that's all, I should really get going," I said, my hand already reaching for the doorknob. I couldn't stand to be in this room with him for another second. "Wait." The word was sharp, a command. I stopped, my back to him. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice strained. I heard him move, the soft scuff of his shoes on the floor. He was coming closer. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, on my escape route. "That night at the lodge," he said, his voice now directly behind me. I could feel his presence, the heat of his body, even though he wasn't touching me. "In the hallway. You thought I was going to kiss you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. My blood froze. I couldn't breathe. I started, but my voice failed. "I wanted to," he whispered. The words were so soft I almost missed them. They were a confession, dragged out of him against his will. God, I wanted to. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was cruel. A new, more sadistic level of manipulation. What did he want from me? Another performance. "But I couldn't," he continued, his voice thick with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. "Because it wouldn't have been for the deal. It would have been for me. And that wasn't part of our arrangement. It wouldn't have been fair to you." My carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. I turned around slowly to face him. He was standing so close, his face etched with a turmoil that looked devastatingly real. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a man who looked lost, uncertain, vulnerable. "Fair to me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you think any of this has been? You knew. You knew how I felt about you. You used me." A look of genuine pain crossed his face. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Leo, no. I chose you because I trust you. Because you're the only person who sees me. You said it yourself. You see things. I hoped this ridiculous plan would be a way to, I don't know, bridge the gap between this desk and yours. It was a clumsy, stupid, high-stakes way of trying to get to know you without the glass wall between us." My mind was reeling. I couldn't process his words. It was too much, too impossible. "I've wanted to do this since the first day you walked into this office," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense murmur. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a second before his fingers gently, hesitantly, touched my cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of lightning that shot through my entire body. I am not a good actor, Leo. I have been pretending for the last 2 years. Pretending I don't notice the way you look at me. Pretending it doesn't affect me. Pretending I don't feel the exact same way. This is it. The moment. It's not happening in a rustic lodge or a fancy suite. It's happening here, in this sterile office, the place where my silent obsession began. His thumb strokes my cheek, a feather-light, impossibly gentle gesture. My eyes search his, looking for the lie, for the angle. But there is none. There is only a raw, terrifying honesty. The same vulnerability I saw in his eyes at the lodge. The deal is done, he whispers, his gaze dropping to my lips. We don't have to pretend anymore. My heart sinks for a split second, the old fear resurfacing. It's over. I don't want to stop. I hear myself say, the words a direct echo of my fantasy, a desperate plea torn from the deepest part of me. A slow, beautiful smile spreads across his face. It's not the crooked, knowing smile, or the polite, public one. It's a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Good, he breathes. Because neither do I. And then he leans in and kisses me. It's not like the movies. There is no swell of music, no dramatic camera angles. It's quiet, and it's hesitant at first. A soft, questioning pressure of his lips against mine. It's a question, and I answer by leaning into him, my hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt, bunching the fine cotton in my fists as if I'm afraid he'll disappear. The kiss deepens. It's a release of 2 years of stolen glances, of unspoken words, of the suffocating tension of the glass wall. It's the taste of coffee and scotch and something that is just him. It's the feeling of finally being seen and wanted in return. It's not rushed. It's a slow, deliberate exploration, a conversation without words. It's the dismantling of the boss and the employee, leaving only Julian and Leo. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hands are on my waist, holding me steady, holding me close. I can feel the frantic beat of his heart against my chest, a rhythm that matches my own. I was so scared, he murmurs against my skin. The admission of fear from this man, my unshakable boss, is more intimate than the kiss itself. Me too, I whisper back. We stand there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, in the quiet dark of his office, with the city lights twinkling below us like a sea of fallen stars. The glass wall is just a pane of glass. It has no more power. He had crossed the distance. Or maybe, we had met in the middle. The morning after was a study in quiet awkwardness. I woke up in my own bed, the scent of him a phantom on my pillows, the memory of our kiss a vivid, burning brand in my mind. We had stayed late at the office, talking for hours. Not about work, but about everything else. About his father's wooden dog, about my abandoned architectural drawings, about the loneliness we had both felt on opposite sides of the glass. He had driven me home, and at my door, he had kissed me again, a soft, lingering goodnight that promised more. But in the harsh light of morning, doubt began to creep in. Was it real? Had it just been the emotional high of closing the deal, the residual intimacy of our charade? Walking into the office felt like stepping onto a stage after the play has ended, the props all ask you, the magic gone. He was already there, of course. He was at his desk, on the phone, his voice the familiar, crisp tone of a CEO. He saw me through the glass, and for a moment, our eyes met. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. No smile, just a nod. My stomach plummeted. It was a professional acknowledgement. A sign that the night before was being filed away, a momentary lapse in judgment. I spent the morning in a fog of anxiety, staring at my computer screen, rereading the same email a dozen times without comprehending a single word. I felt the old distance creeping back, the glass wall reasserting its power. He was the sun, and I was back in my distant, cold orbit. Maybe the new job search wasn't such a bad idea after all. Just before lunch, my desk phone buzzed. It was his extension. My office, was all he said. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made the familiar walk. My mind raced with apologies and resignations. I had misread everything. I had been a fool. I pushed open the door, prepared for the worst. He was standing by his credenza, not his desk. He had 2 mugs in his hands. He held one out to me. It was coffee. I figured you could use this, he said, his voice quiet. His eyes were soft, tinged with an uncertainty that mirrored my own. I took the mug, my fingers brushing against his. The small spark of contact was a reassurance. Thank you, I murmured, my eyes fixed on the steaming black liquid. Leo, look at me, he said gently. I lifted my head. He was watching me with an expression of intense sincerity. Last night was not a mistake, he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. I woke up this morning feeling clearer than I have in years. But I also realized that this, he gestured around the office, is complicated. I am still your boss. We work together, and I don't want to mess this up by moving too fast or making you uncomfortable. The relief that washed over me was so profound it made my knees weak. I had to set the coffee mug down before I dropped it. I'm not uncomfortable, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I was just confused. This morning, you seemed so distant. I was giving you space, he admitted. I was terrified I had overwhelmed you. That you'd come in this morning with your resignation. The fact that he had harbored the same fears as me, that he was just as insecure about this as I was, shattered the last vestiges of the impenetrable CO persona. He was just a man who was as new to this, and as scared of losing it as I was. He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. So, we're okay. We're okay, I confirmed, a real smile, the first genuine smile of the day, spreading across my face. He smiled back, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. Good. He glanced towards the open door of his office, then back at me. Tonight. Dinner. My place. And you can tell me if my apartment is anything like the one we invented. I'll be the judge of that, I said, feeling a playful confidence I hadn't known I possessed. It's a date, he said, the word hanging in the air, simple and solid and wonderfully real. The next few weeks were a quiet navigation of our new reality. At the office, we maintained a careful professionalism. The stolen glances across the glass wall were still there, but now they were filled with a shared secret, a silent promise of later. The real change happened after 5 o'clock. We spent our evenings at his apartment, a stunning minimalist space with panoramic views of the city. It was nothing like the cozy, cluttered home I had invented for us, but we were slowly making it our own. I did cook for him. I made him lasagna, and he ate it with a look of such genuine, unadulterated pleasure that it made my heart ache. He told me it was the best he'd ever had, and I knew he wasn't just saying it. We talked for hours, filling in the blanks of the years we had worked side by side but worlds apart. I learned about his strained relationship with his family, his fear of not living up to his father's legacy. He learned about my quiet, lonely childhood, my passion for design that I had buried under a mountain of practicality. We were building something real, piece by piece, on the foundation of a lie. The irony was not lost on me. But our fictional history had, in a strange way, given us a shortcut to intimacy. We had already practiced being vulnerable with each other. We had already performed the roles of a loving, supportive couple. Stripping away the pretense and finding the truth underneath was easier than starting from scratch. The true test came a month after Wyoming. Julian called an all-hands meeting. The Sterling Thorne deal had officially closed, and the first payment had come through. The mood in the conference room was celebratory. Julian stood at the head of the table, the picture of a confident, successful leader. He thanked the team, his gaze sweeping across the room. When his eyes met mine, he paused for a fraction of a second too long. A tiny, almost imperceptible hitch in his speech. And in that moment, I saw it again, the conflict. The pull between his public role and his private feelings. The fear of what would happen if those two worlds collided. After the meeting, the gossip started. A few of my colleagues cornered me by the coffee machine. You and Julian seemed pretty close on that Wyoming trip, said Sarah from accounting, her tone a little too casual. We heard Thorne specifically requested you. What's the secret? My face grew hot. I mumbled something about being the project lead, about knowing the numbers inside and out. It was a flimsy excuse, and I could tell they didn't buy it. The rumors that had always swirled around Julian's private life were now starting to include me. I felt a spike of panic. This was what Julian had been afraid of. This could undermine his authority, make things complicated and messy. I avoided him for the rest of the day, my anxiety building. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe a relationship between a boss and an employee was impossible, doomed to fail under the weight of office politics and professional scrutiny. That evening, I let myself into his apartment, my heart heavy. He was on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He didn't turn around when I approached. "I heard the gossip today," I said quietly, standing beside him. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I figured it would start eventually. Are you okay with it?" I asked. "With people talking?" He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I thought he was going to say it was too much, that we needed to be more careful, that we needed to end it. My chest tightened in anticipation of the blow. Finally, he turned to face me. He took both of my hands in his grip firm and steady. "I spent my entire adult life building walls, Leo," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Walls between my work and my life, between who I am in the boardroom and who I am when I'm alone. I thought it was the only way to be successful, to be taken seriously. I built that glass wall in my office for a reason, so everyone could see in, but no one could really get close." He squeezed my hands. "And then you came along. And you didn't just see through the glass. You saw through all of it. You saw me, the real me, the man who keeps a wooden dog in his pocket." He reached into the pocket of the jacket slung over a nearby chair and pulled something out. He pressed it into my palm. It was a small, crudely carved wooden dog. It was worn smooth with time and touch. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "What people say, the gossip, the rumors, it doesn't matter," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "The only thing that matters is this. Us. I am done hiding. I am done pretending to be something I'm not." He took a deep breath, a man making a conscious, deliberate choice. "I'm going to talk to HR tomorrow. I'm going to officially disclose our relationship. We'll figure out the logistics, a new reporting structure for you, whatever we need to do to make it work. Because I am not letting you go." Tears pricked my eyes. It was the boldest, bravest thing I had ever heard. He was willing to risk the neat, orderly world he had built, all for me, for us. "Okay," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Okay." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me all day melted away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. We were going to be okay. We would figure it out, together. The final scene of my old life played out on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in Julian's apartment, tying my shoes, getting ready for work. The morning light was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same light he had once said would be perfect for my desk. Sunlight glinted off the simple silver band on my left hand, a ring we had bought together the previous weekend. Julian came out of the bathroom, a towel around his waist, his hair damp. He stopped and leaned against the doorframe, a soft smile on his face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I looked around the room, at my clothes in his closet, my books on his nightstand, my life interwoven with his. A year had passed since the Wyoming trip. A year since he had told HR that the firm's star project manager was no longer reporting to him, but was, in fact, his partner. There had been gossip, of course. There had been challenges. But we had navigated them, together. The glass wall at the office was still there, but now, when I looked through it, I just saw the man I loved, working. It held no more power, no more symbolism. It was just a piece of architecture. "I was just thinking," I said, looking up at him, "about how my world used to be so small. It was the space between my desk and your office door." He walked over and sat down beside me on the bed. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, the metal of his own ring cool against my skin. "And now," he prompted gently. I looked from our joined hands to his face, at the gray eyes that were no longer unreadable, but filled with a love and softness that was reserved just for me. The $90 million deal had been the catalyst, the elaborate lie had been the stage, but the love we had built was real and solid and true. It was the lasagna on a Tuesday night, the shared silence while reading in bed, the feel of his hand in mine. It was the quiet, steady rhythm of a life built together. "Now," I said, my voice filled with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, "it feels like I've finally come home."